Hi, Israel. Hi, Ellie. I'm doing this book review from Florida for you, and it's on the book The Harbinger by Jonathan Cahn. And Jonathan Cahn is Jewish, but he's a Messianic Jew, which means he has come to know Jesus as a Savior. He's also a pastor and a rabbi. So we're going to get his perspective in this book, of course. What is the book about? It's called The Harbinger. Well, The Harbinger, it's a novel mystery narrative. So as you go through, it's kind of like giving clues, kind of like a Sherlock Holmes style, where they give the clues and then he has to figure out what the next clue is on the prophecy. And the prophecy basically is a prophecy on what's going to happen to America. So we're looking at that there's something in the future of America, and it's based on true events. So the events that are portrayed in here really did happen, although the characters, and there's only 3 characters really in the book, and one of the main character is Noriel, and he's a journalist, and Noriel being Jewish origin, he is a reporter too. And then Anna, and she's a media reporter. So, and he's giving the story to her. So you know what's going to happen next is that she is going to take this story and give it to many other people. And then there's a character called the prophet. And this is the man with no name. So, and because he has no name, because he says it's not about the messenger, it's not about him, but it's about the message that he's going to give. So really, when you think of the man with no name and the way he shows up at these spots, you're wondering, is this man really an angel type prophet? Because he knows too much, and he knows a lot about Noriel, and how could he know that? So as we go through, we're wondering about this unlikely character and even his looks. He wears a dark black coat, and his hair is kind of gray and black, slicked black back, it says, and he just seems to show up, but has a very sweet personality. And the plot. So the plot it begins with Noriel meeting Anna, and they're at the top of a skyscraper in New York, looking out over New York City. And Noriel is there to share with Anna about this story, and wanting to share it with many people. So he's going to tell the whole story. So the whole book is about Noriel telling the story to Anna. And most of the time they're in this skyscraper in New York, but they also go down and take a walk and go to the coffee shop, I think. So Anna wants to know, and so the story is presented that way. So the ancient mystery, the secret holds the ancient mystery to America's future. But the clues are 2,500 years ago. Noriel, he receives a seal in the mail. And this seal is kind of a clue because he doesn't understand, because it's written in a different language. So he has to find out what it says. And it's written in Paleo-Hebrew, it says. In fact, Judean, which is kind of his heritage as being Jewish. And so he goes for this walk on the Hudson River, and that's where he meets this unlikely character prophet. And the prophet comes to him and looks at, as he's looking at the seal, he knows about the seal, and so basically says, oh, I know about this seal. And it's a warning. Basically, he said, this seal was used for given decrees by kings in ancient times. And basically, it was called a harbinger because it was a harbinger of warnings or decrees, important decrees. This seal sealed this and what was going to happen. So, and as he goes on, he's basically calls Noriel by name. So he's like, how did he know my name? And he knows that he received this in the mail. As time goes on, and you have to read, it's very enlightening as you read their conversations. But as he goes on, the prophet, knowing his name, and he leaves. So Noriel goes and he searches the Bible out to see, because the prophet says there's 9 more harbingers, and he gives him another seal. So he takes the seal, looks things up in the Bible, thinking, if it's Hebrew, we know there's a lot of the Hebrew in the Old Testament and centering on the Old Testament. And so then he's looking, and he returns to that Hudson Bay, that place, that bench that he was sitting before, to see if he could find this prophet again. Well, he returns 3 times, and on the 3rd time that he returns, there is the prophet. And so again, he gets another clue, and the prophet tells him some things about each of these seals. And knowing, he said, the seals are from northern Judah from the year 700 BC, like I said, 2,500 years ago. And these seals were also written as the warnings, in Hebrew were from prophets. And the prophets of the Old Testament were prophets such as Elijah and Elisha, Hosea, Amos, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And he said, it's a time that Israel turned away from the Lord. And that's what this harbinger is about. He said Israel forgot its foundation, that it was founded on God. And it broke God's covenant in major ways. And during this time, they were basically thinking that they were going to be blessed for eternity, because they were Israelites and that God would always bless them. But their blessing, in fact, came from a conditional blessing, not an unconditional blessing. The blessings and the curses of Israel, saying, if you follow me, I will bless you mightily. But if you turn to idols, the curses of the idols will come on you. And they did. They turned to idols and altars of Baal and Moloch, even child sacrificing their newborns or babies on the altars of Moloch. How gross. They became very immoral in many ways, not only adultery and fornication, but homosexuality, all that. And they became complacent to God and thought, oh, God's not really watching us. And they merged with other gods. They went and basically took other gods and saying they're the same as their God. They had kind of spiritual amnesia towards God. So looking at that, it is compared to what is going on to America. You see, God removed the hedge of protection from Israel, and there was a shaking and calamity in 732 BC. Not only the Assyrian cultures, the Syrians were very harsh. Did they take over Israel, southern Israel, but also, or northern Israel, but also Judah. And Judah was actually taken over by the Babylonian Empire and taken into captivity for 70 years. And we'll talk about that. But so he compares this to what's going on in America, that America was patterned after the same pattern as Israel. Our founding fathers were magnificent at praying to God and trusting God. We call this a Judeo-Christian settlement, or actually foundation, I should say, of America. And that if America would follow God, America would be blessed, powerful, and prosperous, which has happened with America. That America, as well as Israel, was called to be the light of the world. And indeed, America has been a light to the world, to bring people from all different cultures and all different countries, to bring the poor and the needy and those that needed just hope to America. So America, like Israel, as though Israel's light was darkened, that America started to go away from God. Because America's promises, and we'll find that out, were not conditional either, the same as Israel. Because the prophecy goes back to the beginnings of George Washington, and we'll tell what George Washington basically said, that America would be blessed as long as we trusted God. So where much, the Bible says, where much is given, much is required. And much would be required for America because God gave America much. Well, what has happened in America and through history as we get into the 1960s, and I lived in the 1960s, so it's not too long ago, that prayer was abolished in schools. The education system was changed, and then they took down the 10 Commandments, saying, oh, these 10 Commandments are pretty much meaningless. There are no absolutes. Just like Israel, huh? And in the schools, atrocities were taught in the schools. What's being taught in the school? You know. Things are being taught that shouldn't be there. And also, Jesus would be taking out. You dare not say Jesus or say that you read the Bible. Try to do a research paper in the public school and use the Bible as a reference, and you'll get docked. That happened to me. And on to idols, of course, in America now. The idols of riches and greed, and the idols in the entertainment industry, sexual sin, immorality, worship of yourself, really, self-worship and selfishness and tolerance, the tolerance of all kinds of immorality, and intolerant of those that are preaching the gospel. That's what's happening in America. So that is the start of this book here, but as it goes through, and I'm going to go through some of this too, because I know I want you to know what the book's about, so you can write up your own take on this book, and then you can read it through, skim it through and see. But as we go, the harbingers, those warnings, and it starts, and I'm not going to go over everyone because each one is a whole chapter, but it starts with the breach. What is the breach? Well, the breach was a seal. That was the first seal, and it had a V like a gap. And so coming to find out, and as Noriel went to the Statue of Liberty, guess who he saw there? Lo and behold, there was the prophet. And as they looked over and talked, there was alarm in his heart because realizing what the breach was. In New York, as you look over the breach alarm had been sounded. And what was this alarm? The alarm was sounded on 9/11/2001 when the World Trade Center, the towers fell. On that day, it was a warning. It was a warning that America was in trouble. So going on from the breach, and that's that first where the walls had fallen, the next seal, the next harbinger was the terrorist. And he looked on, he didn't know what a terrorist was, but as he saw on the seal, he saw these guys with square beards and these weird creatures that looked like they were part bird and such, and giant type warriors. And so he went to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And as he's sitting there, lo and behold, who shows up? Of course, the prophet. And so he sees, as he's in the museum, he walks into this room, and he sees the very same pictures that were on the seal. And he sees in this huge room, he sees these ruins of this ancient people being a specific people called the Assyrians, with an A, Assyrians. Who were these Assyrians? Well, they were go way back to the beginning, in the midst of Mesopotamia, to Nimrod before 900 BC, and okay, how do you pronounce that name? Ashurnasirpal being that home there of the Assyrians. And going back to this area, we find that the Assyrians, being these warriors and very terror brought terror to people, when they killed people and did all these things and led them around by hooks in their noses and everything. I did it awful. I can't even describe the things that the Syrians did to people. But they definitely were terrorists. And guess which we find the terrorists of today and even those that hit those twin towers, they were from that area, from Al-Qaeda. We think of Iraq and Afghanistan down to bin Laden, down to bin Laden and ISIS too. So we see that, sorry, okay, but I didn't get, we see all of that as we go down. Those are the first two warnings, first two warnings. But before he said, okay, there's 7 more warnings. But what are these 7 more warnings? And he says, well, there's a key. And so chapter 3 talks about the key, and basically saying this key has to do with something from the Bible called an oracle. I wrote here at the oracle. So the oracle being, as you read this oracle, it comes from the Bible, and at first they didn't know. He found this seal had weird shapes and unrecognizable shapes, and looking in and looking at these words, and we see these words here. See if you can see these words right here. They're all written in Hebrew words. The first word, Levarnam, means bricks. Nephilo, have fallen. Vigazet means but with hewn stone. Nevu means we will rebuild. Shechem means sycamores. Gudau means have been cut down. Barajam means but with cedars. Nekhophlith means we will plant in their place. And it was written by this guy, and he looks and it's Yeshaya-Ayua. Yeshaya-Ayua. Who's that? It's Isaiah. Isaiah from the Bible. And the number was Isaiah 9:10. So what does Isaiah 9:10 say? These words: the bricks have fallen, but with hewn stone we will rebuild the sycamores. And they have been cut down, but will rebuild with cedars, and we will plant in their place. Basically saying, yes, the bricks have fallen, we will rebuild. With hewn stone, where the sycamores have fallen, we'll replace them with cedars, and then we will do all this. We will rebuild without God's help. I'm going to stop there.